You're listening to The Russell Scott Show.
Steve Kim, welcome to the program.
Morning, how you doing?
Good, thanks. Hey, listen, Steve, we had a huge fight over the weekend in Vegas. Manny Pacquiao versus Juan Manuel Marquez. Unless the audience has been living under a rock, everyone will know what happened. I consider it to be one of the greatest fights of all time in boxing. Rounds 3, 5, and 6, all round of the year caliber. We have the knockout of the year. Break down the fight if you can. Manny Pacquiao versus Juan Manuel Marquez 4.
Well, Russell, it's interesting. I actually thought that Manny Pacquiao was probably having as much offensive success on a consistent basis against Marquez since the early rounds of their first fight back in 2004. I've been ringside now for all four of this rivalry, every single chapter I've been there. And I thought in the second and third fights, I thought for the most part, Marquez controlled the tempo and the pace of those fights for most of those rounds. He was dictating the speed of the fight, when the exchanges were happening, who was initiating contact. But I thought from the very beginning, on this particular night last Saturday, I thought Manny was beating him to the punch. I thought he was very quick off the trigger. In fact, it was probably the best version of Manny that I've seen since about probably 2009, 2010. I thought after the third round knockdown, which was very shocking because coming into this, Russell, we had seen 4 knockdowns all go in one direction. I thought that Manny in rounds 4 and 5 reestablished control of the fight. I thought he was winning round 6. I thought he had all the momentum. And last minute of that round, I remember thinking to myself, looking at Marquez, the way his face is busting up, his nose was busted up, he was bleeding, both eyes were swelling. I said to myself, Manny might actually score a stoppage here in the late rounds. And for full disclosure, coming into this fight, I thought Marquez was going to win a fight that looked very similar to last year. So I was a little bit stunned by what was taking place. And then, in my opinion, I think in the last 5 seconds of that round, Manny Pacquiao got greedy. I think Manny wanted to put the finishing touches on that round, and I think he got into a position where he hesitated. Marquez timed his feint. He got caught in no man's land. His alignment was bad. He got his head on the wrong side, and he came right down the alley of that right hand. I think if this was baseball, they'd say that he hung a curve. And it was one of the most shocking, stunning knockouts I've ever been ringside for. I think it's right up there because of the caliber of fighter and their histories since Roy Jones got knocked out by Antonio Tarver. I mean, it was quite a night, Russell.
Well, that was as devastating as Apollo Creed's knockout to Ivan Drago in Rocky IV.
I mean, yeah, wasn't that the one where Rocky would not throw in the towel?
That's true.
Remember that shot where like Rocky's just like winging back, and he's like, "Well, Apollo does not want me to do it." But but listen, let me tell you something. I'm very happy though that Manny was able to get up. That was a shocking scene. As exhilarating as it was, Russell, it was also frightening. It really was. To see a guy prone, lifeless, and I'm sure you've seen all the photoshops and all the fun people are having with it. But for about 35, 40 seconds, as he laid there, I mean, Kenny Bayless could have counted to 150. I don't think Manny would have beat that count. And to actually see Manny do the post-fight interview and to see him in subsequent interviews in the days after actually be in good spirits is actually a relief. And that was just one of the most frightening things I think I've ever seen ringside.
Now, I've never seen anything like that. I was screaming. I imagine that every single person in the neighborhood heard me scream. That blew my mind.
Yeah, it's interesting, Russell. In the arena, I wrote about this in my lead feature the day after for the fight. I happened to just look around the audience, which was very pro-Marquez. I thought this was the lowest amount or the lowest concentration of Filipinos that I've ever seen for a Pacquiao fight. And we're talking about a fan base that wanted blood. I mean, Manny Pacquiao, who's been nicknamed by some the Mexicutioner, has had an unbelievable run against Mexican fighters. Guys who are going to be in the Hall of Fame, like Eric Morales, Marco Antonio Barrera, and obviously Marquez. But with Marquez and his fans, there was a certain frustration because they believed that they had won at least one of those fights, but were 0-2-1 coming in. And specifically that last fight and the way the decision played, I think there was a tinge of anger. And as the fight is waved off, I happened to look into the audience, scanning the arena, and there were cups of beer being thrown everywhere. I mean, it was like a thunderstorm of Tecate all around the arena. And you know what, Russell? No one gave a damn. I mean, it was pandemonium. I haven't seen a crowd react quite like that since I don't know when, because this really became almost like a whole country was trying to. I guess it's almost like when our country captured Bin Laden. We had finally gotten this guy. That almost seemed to be like the mentality of those fans on that particular night.
Yeah. Well, Marquez beefed himself up, which might raise some PED questions, but let's not taint the victory. He bulked himself up, added the muscle. Was that the edge in the fight?
Well, the PED question is interesting. It has to be asked. I don't think we're doing our job if we don't ask it. I mean, let's just be very honest about it. PEDs are in boxing, and I think if they're not rampant, they are widely used. And when you hire a guy like Angel Memo Heredia, you do put yourself up for suspicion. Now, with that being said, Manny Pacquiao and Bob Arum and Freddie Roach in the past have resisted extra testing by playing by the rules. So Marquez is playing by the rules. But what I think it should do, Russell, in my opinion, this fight and this whole discussion is let's have a adult conversation and discussion about what we can do to ramp up the process to ensure that less guys cheat, because you're never going to stamp it out. I think it's a little bit unfair that a couple of years ago, Manny Pacquiao was known as the face of steroids in boxing, and now that mantle has been passed to Juan Manuel Marquez. This problem is not about one guy, because it is widely used, PEDs in all sports. And I don't want to hear that on the other side that, Marquez is going to pass all his tests. That's fine. Barry Bonds, Mark McGuire, and Lance Armstrong, they passed hundreds of tests. And when Bob Arum says that commission testing is adequate and fine, then he's becoming a part of the problem. Because, Russell, if you look at what PEDs are used for, in other sports, it's used to hit a baseball 25 feet farther or throw it 2 or 3 miles per hour harder. It's used to run 2 or 3 steps faster. In boxing, it's used to hit someone longer and harder. It's different. As someone who didn't necessarily mind the steroid era in baseball, I loved watching 600-foot home runs and guys belting out 65 home runs regularly. I thought it was entertainment. Boxing's different.
Well, I've seen steroids ruin a boxer's body. Vargas and Mosley were better pre-steroid.
Yeah, they may have been, but there's also guys like that, when they used it, remember where they're at in their career? There was some desperation. Shane Mosley had gone through some rough times. He had lost to Vernon Forrest twice, and he decided to hook up with Victor Conte back in Balca when he was in business in that manner. Fernando Vargas had been knocked out by Felix Trinidad. He got dumped on the canvas in his very next fight. And there was and it was ironic, both guys did it, I think, for career-high paydays against Oscar De La Hoya. We have to address this issue. If we don't, we are risking a certain type of Russian roulette, because Victor Conte, who I believe has changed his ways, has asked me, Steve, what's it going to take for your industry to wake up to this problem? And I tell him, Russell, unfortunately, a ring fatality. That's my opinion, because a ring fatality on national TV in a big fight, and it turns out that other guy was juiced up. Russell, look at the ramifications of what might happen. That's my doomsday scenario I wrote about a couple days ago. That I believe that sponsors would pull their support from the sport. I think venues would think long and hard about staging boxing. And 3, I know this for a fact, that networks would absolutely take a second look at their commitment to this sport. So it's not just a health and safety issue. It's not just a competition issue. But, Russell, it is also an issue of economics.
Tyson hit harder than anyone else, or certainly George Foreman did. No matter how much you're juicing, you can only punch so hard. The boxers have already taken the hardest punches that can be landed, and they haven't died. So how can steroids change that?
I think that's a very naive view. I have to be honest with you. I think one thing, here's another thing. I think steroids can also help you take more punches, which is fine, but your brain is still being rattled. And it's not just steroids, it's EPO. And when you're blood doping and you got a fighter who in the last 4 rounds does not get weaker or get more fatigued, so instead of hitting you, let's say, 10 to 15 rounds as he gets tired, let's say he's able to hit you 30 more times a round because of that extra boost, that extra kick that he gets in the championship stages. That's 120 blows that you are taking that you wouldn't have if you did not face a guy with EPO. I mean, again, it's like the concussion issue in NFL football. There's a lot of guys right now that feel fine, that have had concussions. They don't feel those effects to 20, 30 years. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how boxing deals with this. Will they fix this problem from within, or will they be like baseball, which took congressional pressure and political pressure to change their ways? And another example I would use, Russell, look at the class action lawsuit in the National Football League. Everyone knows football is dangerous. Every single coach and participant knows the dangers of the game. But right now, NFL is going through a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for negligence because did they protect the health and safety of their participants to the fullest degree? I think right now boxing has to look at itself and say, well, this is a dangerous sport. The guys who do it know the risk. But are we doing everything to, number one, level out the playing field, and number two, to do our best to ensure the safety of those guys who get in there and put on those 10-ounce gloves?
Does boxing need a commission, a real one?
But one problem, Russell, and if you're talking about national commission, the one thing that's going to stop all that is states' rights in our country. And then how do you police the European market, the Asian market? Does it need centralized authority? You know, people have said that, but at the same time, the problem is absolute power absolutely corrupts.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to get the right guy. All I am suggesting, along with other people, is just do some out-of-competition testing, make the standards a little bit tougher in terms of the way the testing is done, modernize the methods of doing it, and then, on top of that, make the discipline more harsh, make it more punitive, because all I'm asking
you lose
for
your
is more
purse.
deterrence.
But if they take the purse away from a doped-up fighter, no one will.
I actually wrote an article on that about 3-4 weeks ago, that the problem is when Andre Berto can get nabbed and essentially only sit out 4 or 5 months and then get a career-high payday on HBO to fight Robert Guerrero. Russell, what deterrent was there really for Andre Berto?
There wasn't one. But you know, fans aren't going to be interested in watching boxing with headgear.
No, headgear.
Or flag football.
No, headgear to me is not the... No one's asking for headgear. Headgear, actually, to me, you know, I think there's a misconception with headgear. Headgear is used in the gym to prevent cuts. When guys might clash heads. The problem with headgear, and this has been proven medically, is that when you still jar the head, even though there's a cushioning with the headgear, your brain still rattles within that cage. So headgear is not even being mentioned here. They're really not. All we're asking for is guys are coming into their most natural form. And I think there's a certain advantage that the high-profile fighters have, in a sense, is that they might be able to afford a better pharmacy than guys not making as much money. But I do think it's a systemic problem because not only do the venues who put down a lot of marketing money, they put down a site fee, they may not necessarily want these events canceled under any circumstance. And then you have promoters who have tried to get into the testing process. Well, Russell, the issue there is that they have a conflict of interest, as we saw with Eric Morales back on October 20th. I mean, he had 2 positive tests, yet was still allowed to fight.
Bringing it back to the Pacquiao fight, Jack Dempsey famously said that it's difficult to wake up in the morning when you're wearing silk pajamas. Does that have something to do with it? You know, or Pacquiao's pajamas?
No, you know, here's the thing. He's lived in silk pajamas a long time. I mean, he lives an interesting lifestyle, Manny. But, again, if you take away that perfect punch, and I don't think it was lucky at all. We're talking about a master counterpuncher in Juan Manuel Marquez. I thought that's the best he ever looked over a sustained time over Juan Manuel Marquez. And I was actually very impressed. And I thought that we had started to see a leveling off of Manny Pacquiao, and perhaps even a physical decline. And I know you can't do this, but let's go for 5.5 rounds. Tell me that wasn't a guy focused and ready to win a prize fight.
No, he was looking like he did in the first fight with the head movement, moving from side to side, but maybe he found that distracting. You
know, if you watch that last sequence again, Russell, and I've broken it down a little bit, and I've talked to people that really know the technical aspects of the sport, certain trainers. I've even had a chance to talk to Freddie Roach at the gym about it. The whole night, one thing that Manny did was when he was landing that straight left, he was shading over to his right. And that's one thing southpaws have an advantage. When they start moving over to their right, it's very difficult to hit them with good straight right hands. If you look at that sequence, you look at where he is, his front foot, Manny's, is on the inside of Juan Manuel Marquez's. So right there, the alignment is bad for Manny Pacquiao. Then he kind of hesitates, and he gets frozen. He's in no man's land. And at that point, you see what happens. His head is really, it's like a hanging curveball. And instead of being on the outside of the front shoulder of Marquez, he is in perfect alignment of that right hand, and his head was popped up like a Pez dispenser. I mean, it was a fatal mistake. But I look at it in two ways. Marquez set that up. He executed. Yep. But at the same time, it should not take away from the fact that Manny Pacquiao, up until that point, was looking very, very good that night.
Some could argue that he's lost his last 3 fights, or you could argue that he won his last 3 fights until the last second of the last round.
When I look back at these fights, the Marquez fight, I had him losing that fight 7 rounds to 5. Mm-hmm. But there's also a lot of people that thought that Pacquiao won. When people, to me, we overreact to everything. I thought the third fight was close. Personally, I had Marquez winning. I got a flood of emails saying, Steve, you don't know what you're looking at, which is fine. Now, the Bradley fight, Russell, do you know more than 10 people that actually think he lost that Bradley fight in June? No, I'm being completely... It's funny when people say he's on a 2-fight losing streak. I've always found it interesting, Russell, that everyone screams bloody murder, overturn the decision, but then they so blithely say, yeah, well, he lost that Bradley fight. Mm-hmm. Really? Mm-hmm. I mean, you're trying to say that boxing is ruined and it was a fix, yet then you accept that decision so easily. Sometimes, Russell, as they say, you have to trust your eyes.
I put up an article to boycott any Manny Pacquiao-Tim Bradley rematch. We don't need that in boxing.
Boycotting, I don't know about what all that does. Mm-hmm. I've always said, as it relates to pay-per-view or any fight, that boxing fans should make up their minds and watch what they want to watch. Because I hear a lot of outrage over certain fights. And, Russell, listen, I'm sure all of us watch movies, right? We watch different styles of movies. And a Bill Murray movie, I'll watch. I will. Kate Hudson, I won't watch. I think boxing fans need to start being like moviegoers, that if you like chick flicks, go ahead. But if you like sci-fi thrillers, go watch that. If you like comedies, watch that. But there are certain genres of movies that other people don't want to see. And to me, my job is to watch fights. So I don't want to say I'm stuck watching fights, but that's part of my gig. I think boxing fans have to be more discerning as consumers in a sense that if you don't like a certain fighter or fight, you think it's a mismatch, you think it's a massacre, you think it's going to be boring, be discerning, and especially as it relates to pay-per-view or buying tickets, exercise your power as a consumer. And, instead of bitching about it and saying, I'm going to boycott boxing or the sport is dead, just choose to walk away and exercise your power in saying, I'd rather watch something else.
Steve Kim, you're the lead writer for MaxBoxing.com. MaxBoxing's been on the web since 2001. Tell me about the website and what you do over there.
Well, the website, the genesis of Max Boxing was actually started by Doug Fisher and Gary Randall. It's a pioneering site, I think, among most internet boxing websites, a lot of them. One of them was House of Boxing. I knew those guys. We're all based in Los Angeles out here. The House of Boxing had this big acquisition from, I think, Worldwide Entertainment Sports. And eventually that kind of broke off, and we did our own site. They asked me to come along as a partner in March of 2001, and that's how it began. Gary and Doug are no longer with the website. I guess I'm the last of the Mohicans here. And basically what we do is we cover boxing in a magazine-style format. I think boxing websites can run a lot of different ways, Just like there's many different styles in boxing, there are different styles of websites. Are we going to be that website that gives you the quickest updates of undercard fights? Not really. Are we going to be specific in terms of catering to 2 fighters in the world and acting as a publicist? We're not doing that either. I'd like to think what we do is we give you good, in-depth writing and information and insightful coverage. I think that's what we specialize at. And, I'm proud of the work we've done. I think Gabe Montoya has done an excellent job of really being the forerunner as it relates to dealing with boxing's issue with PED. I'd like to think that I give pretty good insight, behind-the-scenes coverage of some of the politics of boxing. We have historians like Marty Mulcahy, and I say this, I think our writing staff matches up with anyone in terms of this realm.
Mayweather in 2013, I've been saying it for 10 years, he's the best. You'll probably disagree with me. You'll probably tell me that Leonard could have beat him. But for me, Floyd Mayweather is the best defensive fighter. He's an intelligent fighter. And I think with what we saw with the Pacquiao fight, no one lost worse than Floyd Mayweather that night.
Yeah, yes and no. Honestly, people said did that kill Mayweather Pacquiao? No, it was already dead. I thought as it did not happen after 2010, I never bought into any of the machinations or the maneuverings after that. I felt they had a window of opportunity to make that fight, and it didn't happen. And I was always of the belief, Russell, and I did various interviews on radio shows across the country, and I wrote it, that I never thought the fight was going to happen for various reasons. Number one being the animus between Bob Arum and Floyd Mayweather, and then Golden Boy and Top Rank. So, did Mayweather lose? Yeah, but I don't think he lost on that night in terms of that fight. In fact, I don't think either guy did. And I think Pacquiao Marquez 5, I think is going to do very good business next year when they eventually make that rematch. So Mayweather moving forward, he is going to fight May 14th. I know that for sure. I know they've announced 2 dates, but honestly, he hasn't fought twice in a single calendar year in a very long time, Russell. I think it's 2006 or 7 that he's actually fought in a multiple year, or twice in one 12-month period. I think it's going to be Robert Guerrero. I talked to a representative of Guerrero at the fight last week, and they said the discussions have begun. So I think clearly that's the direction they're going. So we'll see what happens from there. And as for Canelo Alvarez, I know a lot of people have asked me, do I think he's going to fight him? Russell, I've been told by people closer to that situation that Miguel Cotto fight, even though he won pretty decisively in a very entertaining fight, that was a very tough fight for him physically, if you look at it. It's not often we see him bloodied up. And his preference is to stay at welterweight at 147 pounds. So if I had money to bet, which I don't, I would bet that he faces Robert Guerrero May 4th, and then from that point on, he'll decide his future.
It was in 2007 where he fought Ricky Hatton and Oscar De La Hoya. You're right, that was the last time he had fought twice in one calendar year. Well, what about the Canelo Alvarez fight? Irish boy Saul Alvarez. Frankly,
I don't know what he does, because you want to talk about a guy losing a fight? That was what happened a couple of weeks ago when Miguel Cotto made that very questionable decision to a lot of boxing.
Why did he fight Trout?
Well, you're right. Why did he go fishing, Russell? I have no idea. I have no idea.
I looked at the first round. I tweeted Dan Raffaello, and I said, this isn't going to be easy. I mean, you just have to look at the frame of Trout.
Going to be easy. Russell, my official prediction was Trout would win the boxing match, Cotto would win the decision, and Trout won it so decisively you couldn't even do that. And I just remember a scene from the press conference. I mentioned this to Austin as I was talking to him from our feature story. Austin was much bigger than Miguel. I mean, he towered over him. And I said to Austin, did you notice how much big? He said, yeah, I was actually surprised. And I think, in my opinion, Russell, I think that Miguel Cotto was given a very bad decision by Gabby Penagrico, his advisor, who wanted to do it himself. He could have fought Manny Pacquiao for much more money, and I know people are going to say he didn't like the catch weight. Russell, let me tell you something. The money that he was going to get compared to what he got for Trout, which is literally a quarter of the money, you come to a resolution on weight when it's $7-8 million difference, at least. You do. And I think they wanted to break off. They needed an opponent at the Madison Square Garden where he's become one of the legitimate draws of the past generation. And Greg Cohen, who represents Austin Trout, flat out said to me, we got this fight because we have the WBA belt. So it was obvious that they wanted to go belt hunting, which is certainly their prerogative. And the plan was to fight Canelo Alvarez on May 4th. So the real loser in that fight was not just Miguel Cotto, it was also Saul Alvarez.
Does this taint Cotto? Or does he still make the Hall of Fame?
Listen, I don't really get into it all that much, but if I had a vote, and if you were to canvass the opinion of the people that do have a vote, I think that he would get in. I mean, think about it. Last night it was announced that Arturo Gatti made the Hall of Fame. Love Arturo Gatti. Now, if Arturo Gatti can get into the Hall of Fame, you look at Cotto's career, it's been much more consistent, and he beat a good roster of names. And he's only lost to the very best in the sport, like Pacquiao and Mayweather. So the fact that he's won multiple championships in different divisions, the fact that he became a draw, he's given us great moments. I don't think a loss later in his career to a pretty skilled guy in Austin Trout, I don't think that bounces him from Canastota.
Does Trout give Floyd Mayweather a run for his money?
Yeah, he does, but again, if you look at the risk-reward ratio, I don't think that Trout is even in the picture, because number one, he's a big 54, and he's southpaw. It's just all wrong for Floyd, and not just fight-wise or styles. Just looking at the business of it, Robert Guerrero's coming off some pretty high-profile victories, the last one on HBO against Andre Berto Thanksgiving weekend, and then also, he is Mexican-American, and when you fight on that pay-per-view slot, a lot of these slots now, whether it's Cinco de Mayo or whether it's Mexican Independence Day weekend in mid-September, these are very ethnic-specific pay-per-view slots now. That's the way the business is kind of operated. And in that equation, Robert Guerrero fits in much better than Austin Trout.
Mayweather wins that easy?
Against Guerrero?
Yeah.
You know what's interesting? I've had a few matchmakers that I really trust tell me that they actually think that Guerrero and his all-out aggression and the fact he does have long arms and he's going to be there is actually more difficult than most people think. I mean, Russell, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that Mayweather may seem to be on top of his game, but he's at that stage of his life where you start to decline physically. And he did get touched up a lot by Miguel Cotto, who I thought was fading as a fighter, even last year as he beat Margarito, who just got beat decisively by Austin Trout. I'll never forget, Russell, during August, I was going up to Big Bear, and we were driving. I was with Jonathan Banks, the heavyweight, and we were talking about the fight, and he's a Detroit guy. And we were talking about that Cotto-Mayweather fight. He said, Steve, from my perspective, and he's a fighter and he's going to be a trainer, he said, Steve, Mayweather is very good, because I think Floyd is definitely slowing down. He said that he saw signs of slippage, and as you put everything in perspective together and you tie it up, you say to yourself, you know, Floyd got hit a lot by a guy who may have not been the same since about 2008. So this is a young man's sport for the most part, or at least it has been before this generation. I'll say one thing about Guerrero. He's a passionate guy. He's wanted this fight. So I actually think that Guerrero, because of the fact that he does throw punches in volume, I actually do think that he would win a couple of rounds. I don't think it's a complete mismatch. Let's just put it that way.
The undercard, not much to say about it, but let's briefly touch on Gamboa's performance. Was he doing a bad Chris Eubanks impression? I find him kind of arrogant.
Because, you know, I've never been that high on Gamboa.
Yeah, neither am I. He looks like he can get hurt, too.
No, there's no doubt. Listen, when you've been dumped to the canvas 7 times in your life, you don't have a good chin.
Hey, Marquez has been down 6 times.
Right, but you know what's funny? Higher caliber of fighters.
Yeah.
You got to look at who you're being knocked down by. And 4 of those came from Manny Pacquiao. A lot of guys get drilled by Manny Pacquiao. And when Marquez gets sent to the canvas, he bounces right up. Gamboa wavers. I think there is a difference in knockdowns. I really do. Number one, caliber of opponents, and also how hurt you are. I said halfway through the fight, I tweeted, for all those people that want to see a Broner fight, I think Broner physically manhandles him. I just simply think he's too big, too sturdy, too tough, and every bit as skilled. Gamboa, to me, is a talented guy, but he's that rare Cuban amateur star that has no ring generalship and a very low boxing IQ. But on the flip side, Russell, that's also what makes him very fun and entertaining. He's not like most Cubans.
Year 2012 in review. We've only got a few weeks left. How was the year 2012 for boxing?
Very fun. A lot of stuff happened. I mean, as I start formulating my stuff for the K9 Awards, my year-end review, there's a lot of candidates for fight of the year, round of the year, knockout of the year, which obviously I think was last Saturday, and you have a lot of strong candidates. The only one I don't really have a definitive feel or a self-consensus is really fighter of the year. I mean, Russell, it is hard to choose from guys who fight once or twice a year. It really is. I think it's been a fun year. I've been to a lot of fights. I've been able to go to Macau to cover a fight, actually announce it. I've been to Puerto Rico. I've been to Texas a couple times. A lot of fights in L.A. So a lot of stuff has happened, and it proves once again that Pacquiao-Mayweather not taking place will not be the ruinization of boxing, Russell. It really won't be. And I actually think that as I look back and I'm kind of sifting through month by month some of the stuff that we saw Salido and Juan Manuel Lopez put on another great fight. We saw Brandon Rios against Mike Alvarado. I was ringside for that. That was incredible. We saw Kell Brook, Carson Jones. That was a very good fight, and we saw great knockouts. And across the European market, you see strong audiences show up time and time again for fights. I think this year has been a very good year for boxing. If you're of the belief that Mayweather-Pacquiao is everything for boxing, then it's a failure. But I would also argue you probably don't know what you're talking about then.
Well, if every fight was as good as Pacquiao-Marquez 4, nobody would be talking about UFC.
Right, and, listen, there's room for UFC, but I never believed in the UFC takeover of boxing. And if you look at the actual numbers, not the Dana White rhetoric, the actual numbers of tickets sold, tickets comped, total live gates, pay-per-view numbers, and Nielsen ratings, that simply is not true. And, Russell, another great development for boxing is the fact that on this Saturday and the Saturday after on NBC, we will have boxing on back-to-back weeks on network terrestrial TV. I wouldn't have bet on that a year ago.
When was the last time boxing was on NBC?
Well, NBC's done a little boxing. They did the main event series for about a month or two back in 2003. That didn't really work out.
Yeah.
And they also did the Contender. If you remember, their first season of the Contender was actually a primetime special on the network. CBS last did boxing. I referenced it in my Leo Santa Cruz article that's out today. The last time CBS did boxing was in July of 1997 when, this is how long ago it was, Russell, Bernard Hopkins was this unknown middleweight belt holder, and Glenn Johnson was actually undefeated. That's how long ago it was. And the kid fighting this week, being spotlighted on the Tiffany Network, is Leo Santa Cruz. He was 9 years old when that fight took place. So in many ways it is historic. Listen, I'm not saying we're going to see Ali Frazier on Saturday night, but I do think it is a step forward, and according to Steven Espinoza of that corporation, that if the fight performs well, we may see it back.
Did we lose Friday night fights?
Well, what they do now, and they've done this for several years, is they go from January to late August, and at that point, King Football takes over. And I think what was going on, I actually did a story on this years ago, they had way too many Fresno State football games going to double overtime, and it took 4 hours. And boxing, they had to back up the start times. They had to start tape delaying shows. For the continuity of the show and to, I think, condense the budget, they only go 9 months. But they will start up again January 4th.
Okay, let's look at the next big fight.
I'd say that there's a major mega fight, but the first card, Russell, that I'm looking forward to and I'm actually going to be traveling to is the HBO triple header. Get to see Gennady Golovkin, who is just a blockbuster of a middleweight. I think that he's the real deal. I'd like to see more facing resurgent Gabe Rosado. We also have the fight that I'm looking forward to as a pure boxing fan is Orlando Salido against Mikey Garcia. It's an excellent little battle. And then what should be a fun TV fight between Rocky Martinez and J.C. Burgos for the WBO 30-pound title. I think that is a very, very fun night of boxing at the theater, and all three fights will be shown on HBO. So that's probably the first fight of next year that I'm looking forward to.
Isn't there a Jorge Arce fight coming up, though?
Yeah, there's this Saturday in Houston against Nonito Donaire. Nonito Donaire, by the way, has fought 4 times this year, which is an awful lot for a guy on that HBO Showtime level.
Hey, maybe he should be a contender for Boxer of the Year.
No, I certainly think he is. I mean, if you look at what he's done, he took on a good contender in Vasquez, won or unified belts at 122 in his last couple of fights. He beat a very respected Japanese champion in his last fight. And then Arce is designed to make him look good because as successful as he has been in the wins and loss column, there's been something aesthetically lacking in his fight. So I think he is certainly a candidate and just that type of activity. And I do believe this, Russell. I think next year we will see a fight between Nonito Donaire and Guillermo Rigondeaux.
MaxBoxing.com is the website. Steve, how does my audience get in touch with you?
Well, all you have to do is just go to the website. You'll see all my articles there. Also, my email address is very simple. It's the letter K, numeral 9, KIM at yahoo.com. And I'm also on Twitter at Steve Max Boxing, all one word.
Steve Kim, lead columnist for MaxBoxing.com. Thank you so much for being on the program today.
Absolutely, Russell. Let's keep in touch.